There's a game you may have never heard of and almost certainly never played. It's a game by a developer named Volition. You run around in an open world with crazy weaponry, superhero powers, and an attempt to take down bad guys while hijacking cars and taking down ridiculous villains, and it even got Johnny Gat in it. That game is not Saints Row. It's Agents of Mayhem. Agents of Mayhem was an absolute disaster for Volition. A game set in the Saints Row universe that launched in August of this past year and sold so poorly, it forced layoffs at Volition and a lead developer to tell the media that this is going to force some company self-reflection. This was the game Volition made instead of Saints Row 5. It was inherently and foundationally mediocre, and it left gamers wondering what happened to Saints Row. Why was the fourth game in the series so poorly received amongst fans? Why and how did Saints Row shift so dramatically that the company thought this game was a better investment? Saints Row is certainly not dead, but it's also not trending upward. It's in a state of flux. It is at a very real crossroads in which the series' next move may require a complete and utter overhaul. So what has become of the Third Street Saints? Today we take a look at a series that has been missing in action for an entire generation. A series that's been missing in action for about 5 years now. So what happened to Saints Row? Where did Saints Row go wrong? Why was Saints Row 4 so poorly received? Why did Volition feel the need to change? Why did Volition feel the need to start a new IP instead of pursuing the franchise that they once loved so greatly? Well, to get started, let's take a look at what happened when the series first began.
Hey Stewie, how'd the clone turn out? Brian, I can't go to the bathroom by myself. Will you please help me? But I'm good at other stuff.
Bling Bling. That is the name of the game Volition began working on in 2003. During this time, Grand Theft Auto had begun to truly popularize the open world genre, and Rockstar was hard at work on what many at the time would come to consider their magnum opus in GTA San Andreas. THQ saw an opportunity to eat into the market share of a rapidly developing subgenre, to get in on the ground floor. Today, many see Bling Bling, which would later be retitled to Saints Row, as a GTA clone, a replicant of a better series, but that was never the goal. Volition wanted to change the GTA formula. They gave Saints Row multiple story arcs in an effort to make a non-linear approach, a function we now covet in modern RPGs. They wanted to make sure that literally everything in the game served a purpose, everything in their world. This was their design mantra: everything matters. And by adhering to this approach, they gave Saints Row its unique identity. Side missions were fully fleshed out and enjoyable pieces of gameplay that gave character to the world. And these side missions would act in harmony with customization mechanics to ensure you were being rewarded for heading off the beaten path. But in the end, when the game finally launched, all of this dissipated, and what you were left with was a great game that was well received, that existed in the shadow of Rockstar's monolithic series. So they gave it another shot with Saints Row 2, and they refined everything that made the first so special. They took a bit more of a ridiculous approach, waking your character from a coma and telling you to earn your rep back, and they sent you on your way. Many of the cut pieces of the map from the original game, like the mall and trailer park, were reused and placed into the sequel, and players were given a great story, hilarious characters, and even more vibrant and engaging world. And all of this engaged you in a tale that was emotional and bonds that mattered. But just a few months before the second game's 2008 release, GTA 4 released. And again, the game was stuck playing second fiddle to a far bigger competitor. So Volition made a choice. They were going to change Saints Row dramatically and permanently, and this is where Saints Row's trajectory took a turn.
Avis Rent-A-Car is proud to present the second best band in America. Will you welcome Garfunkel, Messina, Oaks, and Lisa singing their #2 hit, Born to Runner Up.
To start, we have to really look at Saints Row 2 to get an idea of what forced Volition to turn Saints Row into what it is today. As a 13-year-old, Saints Row was nothing more than a great game. The comparisons to Grand Theft Auto were confusing. Why pretend as though gaming was a zero-sum medium? Could the two not coexist regardless of their similarities? Now, at 25, having played every console entry in both series extensively, it makes a bit more sense. There is no way around a simple fact. Grand Theft Auto did indeed force Volition to shift the way they approached their open world franchise, but the unfortunate reality is that a lot of this came down to branding. Saints Row 2 did quite a bit better than GTA 4, which, when it comes down to it, was a completely distinct experience. In Saints Row, cars felt good to drive, it was fun traversing the city. It wasn't a chore like the ice blocks of GTA 4 quickly became. GTA 4 attempted to ground itself in a sort of pseudo-realism in its weaponry and action. Guns were guns, and there was nothing more to it than that, whereas Saints Row 2 played up the player's power fantasies and gave into the reality that this is indeed a video game. It need not adhere to any sort of logic. It's a game that embraces the chainsaw and is more than happy to give flamethrowers to any player that wants to use them. This was something that Rockstar denied players. Not only that, but it throws a few more fantastic firearms into the mix as well. a Pimpkane that doubles as a gun, a foam hand that performs insta-kill slaps and sends enemies flying into the air. All this and more was sitting in Saints Row 2, and definitely not in Liberty City. You had actual customization that allowed you to tailor your experience to yourself, to your playstyle. Far more interesting minigames, and again, playing into the zaniness of the game with things like insurance fraud that pit you against oncoming traffic to rack up medical bills and daredevil bike stunts to boot. GTA 4 is a phenomenal game, but it's a far different game. The problem Volition had was that Saints Row 2 was very much marketed as a direct competitor to GTA, which logic dictates is not going to bode well for sales and consumer recognition, and it certainly didn't. Thus, Volition was left with one goal: separation. And what came next was, well, it certainly was separation, and it certainly was different.
Feel every molecule of my body starting to change.
When Saints Row 3 began development, it began development in a state of mass confusion. By this time, 2 Saints Row games have been quietly canceled behind the scenes. Saints Row Money Shot, an arcade game meant to tie into the third game, and a PSP spin-off titled Saints Row Undercover. For the first half a year of its production, Saints Row the Third would attempt to make the canceled Undercover idea work, but they failed, and thus the team was left to start from scratch. And to do so, they made what they and many teams of entertainment call tone pitches. And the base of these pitches was Bad Boys 2 and Hot Fuzz, 2 ridiculous, at times even zany action films, and these created the new design philosophy. Everything must be ridiculous, everything has to be over the top. And my god, it was. The goal was to create a game that was different than what GTA was offering, a game that would ensure those comparisons became a thing of the past. And boy did they ever. The game transplants you into a brand new city in Steelport and tasks you with one goal: go from the product-endorsed celebrity the world knows you as, back to the tough-edged, well, celebrity you want the world to know you as. The game is absolutely ridiculous. The opening mission has them robbing a bank by attaching guy wires to the ceiling of a room-sized vault before explosively separating it from the building and flying away with the entire thing dangling beneath the helicopter, with skydiving and gunfights quickly making their way into the mission. It placed customization at the forefront, allowing you to create any monstrosity of a main character you please, and the craziness didn't stop there. The game's missions were far from your typical GTA fare if that intro is anything to judge by. It got fighter jet missions, wiener melee weapons, and zombies. And this is also where the game starts to become a bit disjointed. In Volition's attempt to separate the experience from the rest of this subgenre, they threw everything into a pot regardless of whether or not the spice is mixed and stirred. To make up for all of your firepower, combat is then hindered by wave after wave of seemingly monster closet enemy spam that can get tedious quick, especially given their atrocious AI. And the fact that by the end of the game, you're juggling enemies on the ground while air vehicles shoot at you from the sky as monstrous brutes come at you head on. If it sounds a little hectic, it is. It's also exhausting. The gumbo pot of ideas reaches a boiling point late in the game when the aforementioned zombies come in for a truly unenjoyable and tedious mission set. It's a frustrating experience of poorly implemented gameplay ideas that don't coalesce into enjoyment, and that's kind of Saints Row 3 as a whole. A whole lot of funny, interesting ideas that are often poorly executed. The game is certainly good. In fact, some may even call it great, but these problems would not be isolated, and they would quickly be exacerbated by the entry that would see the wheels fall off entirely.
You know, Miss Banks, since you had that baby, there's something different about you.
Saints Row 4 was a bad idea from the moment it was conceptualized. The foundation of Saints Row 4 is exactly what developers and publishers should not do with their products and franchises. As soon as Saints Row 3 finished development, Saints Row 4 began pre-production. Simultaneously, work on a DLC pack for Saints Row 3 was also being developed. This DLC was titled Enter the Dominatrix, and its announcement was made to look like an April Fool's joke. It was not. THQ at this time was financially crippled and on the verge of bankruptcy, so they made a business decision. A decision that ignored the will of creatives and artists and told Volition that they needed to turn the DLC into a full-blown game. Take that foundation and make it something to sell at $60. Even worse, the company wanted to get the game out as soon as possible. They fast-tracked the game in response to ensure that the rumors and announcements of next-gen hardware wouldn't hurt the sales of a game that they needed to sell and sell ASAP. As you might expect of a game created out of financial necessity, free and ballooned from a DLC concept, it had a litany of problems, and it is by far the least liked and worst received entry of the series. Everything in it feels a bit hollow. The game is a technical mess to start, especially on PC. Graphical errors, crashing, glitches, they are here in abundance, and likely due to the fast-track development cycle and shortened QA time. When it is working, the activities of the game, Saints Row's side missions, were not nearly as enjoyable or impressive as the previous games, with many of them simply feeling monotonous. Specifically, any activity that puts you in an alien ship. Even worse is that the once great rewards are now boiled down to mainly vehicular rewards, which are completely superfluous given that you drive for a grand total of probably 45 minutes to an hour tops. And that's because now, in this new dark, dingy, alien simulation of a world, you are a superhero. You essentially have the powers of a less refined Crackdown game. In fact, in all actuality, you are essentially playing a less refined Crackdown game. An infamous game with less enjoyable gameplay and a bit of crass on top. The gameplay problems extend to breaking the balance previous games nailed. Now you are far too powerful, which in turn, the game handles by throwing an absurd amount of bullet spongy enemies your way to keep you busy. Sound familiar? It quickly feels like the work teachers give you when you have a sub in high school. Meaningless and time-consuming. Now, it's certainly not all bad. The game is still fun to play, and the characters are as funny as ever. The story and its weaponry is still just as balls-to-the-wall crazy as you'd expect, but it's all drug out over a tedious campaign that should be half as long and across a wholly uninteresting world that should be half as big. It's the definition of average, and it's the definition of rushed. So the question is, what now?
But it turns out that Jim is also his own worst enemy. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Jim is actually my friend.
THQ eventually filed for bankruptcy. The Saints Row name is still in Volition's hands, but they're in a similar position. Agents of Mayhem was Volition's attempt at innovating, at creating a new IP. The problem is they refused to leave Saints Row behind in its entirety and did nothing but take a half step in the opposite direction. The game is a hero shooter, set in the Saints Row universe that gets next to everything wrong. It retains the superhero ideals of Saints Row 4, but stuffs them into a hero shooter, a class-based hero shooter at that, and removes what makes hero shooters interesting in the process. The multiplayer. It's a game where you take out a team of 3 heroes and fight evil all by yourself. An absolutely befuddling decision from a design perspective, and an incredibly strange choice in general. Throughout the game, it attempts to replicate the zaniness of Saints Row to be a more Saturday morning cartoon version of the game, crude humor and all, and it just falls flat. It fails entirely in this process. And the game even goes as far as to include Saints Row characters like Johnny Gat as playable characters, all in an attempt to sell the game to Saints Row fans and utilize the face as a marketing tool. None of it worked at all. Volition stated they wanted to make a game that wasn't a Saints Row game, but they did everything they could to sell it to Saints Row fans and create the expectation that this game would be similar enough in nature to be worth their time. All in the name, again, of selling a product that was a shell of what the studio is capable of creating. The future of Saints Row is now set in stone. The future of Saints Row is now, unfortunately, back in the familiar position of being an absolute financial necessity for a studio and a publisher. Volition has put themselves in a precarious financial position, a position in which their next game's failure could mean very dire times for the studio. With this in mind, common business sense would dictate that the company will likely pivot back to the Saints Row name for a much surer bet than a new IP. With that in mind, that places Saints Row 5 in the exact same position Saints Row 4 found itself in a position of very high stakes. Volition again must succeed with their next game, and that's scary for them and the consumer. It will be very easy for them to rest on their laurels, cash in another Saints game to buy themselves some time and move on, essentially putting the nail in the coffin of a series already on the brink. But the reality is that Saints Row was born as one thing, as a near clone of that thing, and managed to quickly reinvent itself and morph into something quite unique. Thus, we know that Volition very much has the capacity to go back to the drawing board and reinvent the series all over again if they must. But they absolutely must maintain the integrity of that series, even if that integrity is extreme ridiculousness, because that is what makes the series worth playing. That is what prevents it from being a cog in an oversaturated open world marketplace. I would love to see Stillwater once again. I'd love to be a member of the 3rd Street Saints again. So Volition, listen to the people that pay your bills and give us our damn wiener bats to bash our enemies into oblivion with at least one more time. But do so because you love Saints Row as much as some of us do, not because you have to. Well guys, that was it for today's doc, and as always, start of a dialogue. What do you think of Saints Row? What do you think of Saints Row compared to GTA? And what do you like about Saints Row that it does differently? And what don't you like? What is your favorite Saints Row game, more importantly? And what do you want to see come of a Saints Row 5? What do you want that game to be? Remember the answers to any of those questions down in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. If you're not yet a member of this team, press subscribe. I put out gaming analysis, examinations, and essays just like this one twice, sometimes 3 times a week. So subscribe so you do not miss any. As always, I will link my Patreon in the top pinned comment there below, down below. There you can support this channel even further if you feel so inclined. I will also link my Twitter handle in that top pinned comment. Follow me there to get an idea of what games I'm playing and participate in polls so that I know what games you guys want to see talked about and sometimes talk about things that aren't games. Again, I do want to apologize for the setup right now. I know it's not a super great or aesthetically pleasing. I have just moved. I'm still setting up the studio space. So again, bear with me for a couple more videos. By then, I should have my sound dampeners. That's why the video sections might sound a little different as well. So yeah, bear with me through this move. Thank you for the support throughout this entire process. This community is everything. Seriously, we have the best community on YouTube. I know all YouTubers say that, but I mean it. I love you guys. So thank you very much for the support. Also, if you did enjoy this video, I'm sorry. I do put out more and more each week. But maybe you'll catch another one, maybe not. Either way, thank you for giving me a shot. And until next time, guys, I'm out.